You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. Tonight, The Irishman finds Serenity in 2019. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One has 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin, baby. And I am Adam Thomas, and am I in a video game?
And I'm Thomas Mariani, and I have certain rules I need to show you, Adam.
Oh,
this fish finder and everything. We have our fun. Spoiling the movie already before we even get into it. The Irishman, obviously. That's how The Irishman ends. That's why they all look video gamey when they're younger. But, Adam, we're not alone here in our discussion. We have a guest. She is a film writer, and she is a general fan of especially Irishman-related memes and such. It is Miss Brianna Zigler. Brianna, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of yours on Twitter. I love all your writing and stuff. And you're a big film person, obviously. And our discussion for tonight, because we're near the end of the year, is just 2019 overall for film. And given you're a film writer yourself, Brianna, how did you feel about the year?
I loved it. I had a great time. I tweeted a few days ago something about how I feel like I've seen so many tweets from people I follow that this was a bad year for movies or something. If you look at my list of 2019 ranked, the scale is definitely imbalanced towards bad movies, but I feel like the movies that I liked were just so good. It just cancels out the movies I didn't like by so much. So I don't know. I thought it was a fantastic year.
Yeah, I felt generally the same. I think it's, if you ask the general populace, they would probably say that, because I'll say it was a terrible summer for movies.
Oh,
in terms it was so many shitty blockbusters throughout the entire summer. It's one would probably say the Avengers Endgame I liked, and that's it in terms of the bigger mainstream successful films. And I'm guessing, Adam, would you say you lean more toward that direction, given I know you have a smaller view on terms of recent.
So I didn't watch shit this year. I saw what I had to watch for this show, and I ain't seen shit. But what I did see in the theater, there was only one that I saw that I was no, I don't like this. But other than that, everything I saw I liked. What
was Pet the Cemetery, one from this year?
Pet Cemetery.
Okay.
The remake. Get the fuck out of here with this. Everything else I saw in the theater, I actually thoroughly enjoyed. And, it was a pretty decent year for movies.
Yeah, I do agree with Brianna that if nothing else, there were a lot more, especially I think during the spring and during the fall, there was a just influx of great movies. I think at least it was a good sandwich bread of a year. And we're going to talk about 2 films today, because if you're new to the show, every week Adam and I pick 2 movies that we discuss for the next week. And so last week we picked technically 2 films. First, we have our bad pick, which is Serenity, which came out in January. The Matthew McConaughey vehicle that everyone only probably knows because people spoiled the twist online. Because you're wait, what the fuck? They really did this. And then our good pick was something of Adam's choice, which was The Irishman. But that was voted on by all of our listeners out there on our Facebook and Twitter feeds. You all ended up voting between Adam's 2 choices of Shazam and The Irishman. We got The Irishman. We're definitely going as divergent as possible with our 2 picks tonight. So for that, we should also mention, because these are new films out there, we're going to put up a spoiler warning, because usually we cover older films, but definitely considering we are covering 2 films from just this year, just a warning to go see at least one of these. Let's go ahead and get into Serenity.
You know how in Plymouth, I like to say, Everybody knows everything. It wouldn't be funny if the truth was that nobody knows anything.
I will give you $10 million to drop my husband in the ocean for the sharks.
Some weird stuff going on right now. This whole island's a part of it, but nobody knows it.
So Serenity came out January 25th, 2019, was written and directed by Stephen Knight, but it stars Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway, Jason Clarke of the Pet Sematary remake, your favorite movie of this year, Adam, and Diane Lane, Jimon Hansu, and Brianna, you hadn't seen this before we tasked you to,
No.
and we apologize. And given your arousing sentiments just there verbally, how do you feel about Serenity?
First off, I want to criticize you for leaving Jeremy Strong out of your little cast. As soon as he came on screen, I literally yelled out loud, alone to myself. I had no idea he was going to be in this, and he did not save this movie for me.
I would argue he's at least the funniest part of this movie because he's playing this character who keeps coming up as because Matthew McConaughey, the basic story is that Matthew McConaughey plays this guy who lives in this beach town where he constantly fishes and searches for his Moby Dick, a tuna called Justice. While he's searching around, he's tasked to murder his ex-wife's new lover, Anne Hathaway being the wife, and then Jason Clarke being the abusive asshole husband who is apparently beating their child, who is seen only in shots of his room on a computer, and occasionally when he's not either having prostituting himself out for Diane Lane or talking with Jimon Hansu about nothing. Matthew McConaughey keeps getting chased by Jeremy Strong as this guy who keeps trying to sell him a fish finder. And you're thinking, why the fuck does he keep coming and always being exactly so many minutes late? He even comments on it at a certain point. And that's because there's a really bullshit twist that happens halfway through this movie that was sort of the only reason anybody talked about this movie to some extent. Because I had seen a trailer for this in late 2018, and I was this looks like a forgettable drama thriller kind of thing with Anne Hathaway and Matthew McConaughey that's thrown out in January. And then everybody kept posting about guys, there's a really fucked up weird twist that nobody would have expected in this stupid thriller movie with these two actors. And Adam, I know you also hadn't seen this, but you heard about sort of the purported twist. How do you think it worked in context?
I mean, honestly, they show you the twist in the opening frame of the fucking movie.
Yeah, it's so obvious.
Obviously, that's what's going on. What the fuck? Why were people so shocked? And then it's 45 minutes in the fucking movie. Oh, spoiler, and whatever the fuck. The kid's playing the fucking game to, have a relationship with his dad or whatever. Then why the fuck are we following any other character 45 minutes into the movie? Why are we having scenes of all these other characters doing lascivious shit? It doesn't exist. None of that matters. What the fuck is going on?
We need these video game cutscenes to explain bits of the plot at him.
Yeah, with his fucking Nintendo 64 graphic game. Yeah, awesome. This is shit. The thing is, the story's not even that original. It really isn't when you think about it. Oh, we're all part of some construct. The 13th floor exists. What the fuck were they going for here?
There's so many weird things about this, especially considering this is a video game all made by the son. So he programmed every bit we saw in this movie before, that twist is revealed, including his dad.
His mom getting banged.
Yeah, his mom getting banged and abused. Jason Clarke being awful to his mother. All this shit. So what do we have to gain? This is a tragedy, but then it turns out he ends up killing Jason Clarke, so I guess it's a good thing. But then Matthew McConaughey says, oh no, we're connected. You're going to reprogram the video game so you can see me in the video game from your mental asylum? Brianna, help us suss this out somehow.
I kept pausing it, and I know what fucking happened. It wasn't that complicated, but
right.
For one, I felt the twist happened way too early in the movie because I was oh god, there's still so much more. And there was, even before that point, I think I paused it to do something and I realized there was still an hour left. I felt trapped. I felt lost. I can sort of see how not knowing the twist and going into it and thinking it's just some typical fuck you, it's January melodrama bullshit fare, but then this video game thing happens and it's oh fuck, what? But knowing that happens just makes it just boring. It's just boring.
No, I completely agree. The only thing, and I don't think it would have made it any better, but I think it would have made it
Like,
maybe
slightly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is twist till the end.
Yeah, definitely.
Fucking an hour into the movie, and you're like, oh, sweet, 58 minutes to go. Like, what the fuck? Once you reveal the twist, the stakes are gone.
Yeah,
Nothing
I fully
is-
lost interest.
Yeah, it's what the French would call lay bullshit. What a waste of time. And money. Who the fuck funded this movie? What the fuck? Way to go.
They got really good actors, though, and they each got a nice little paycheck, and I'm very happy for them all.
Beautiful locale. They all were on vacation.
They all hung out in Florida or whatever.
Chaman Hansu with his natural accent, and Matthew McConaughey with his gruff, like, Rain of Fire accent with the southern thing. When those two had dialogue, what the fuck are they even saying? Like, what is going on here? Chaman Hansu's like speaking French in a couple scenes, and Matthew McConaughey, what? Why are we doing this right now? And then Anne Hathaway is playing like this femme fatale, like really like 1940s acting it up.
Doing it like completely miscast. I think people give Anne Hathaway a bad rap like in these sort of recent years, but this is definitely complete miscasting of her because she just comes in and immediately she's like a doe being dressed up as Lauren Bacall. It just That's what it feels like. She's just coming in, she's like, oh no, I totally know what's going on here. It's like this is a Princess Diaries bit. This is what it just feels like. It's like, oh, I'm just disguising myself as a femme fatale. It doesn't work at all. And then Matthew McConaughey, I completely agree. This is like him on his off days of the beach bum. Like when he's having fun with fucking Harmony Korine, like he goes, he leaves that, and it's just like, oh, I gotta, I guess, do this. I don't know. Does this mark the official like end of the McConaissance, or was that a bit earlier? I'm trying to think of like this is the official, like it was either this or Dark Tower. One of those two just really marked like, nope, this is over.
I don't think he ever came back from Dallas Buyers Club. I gotta be honest. Maybe True Detective was like his last real fucking like, dude, this guy's good, and then it was kind of like,
I think the beach bum keeps it alive.
That's true. Riding that wave of just sort of like, oh my, he's back, he's can't do any wrong. I would say it's probably around like a Dark Tower is like where it officially demarks. Because even after like True Detective and Dallas Buyers Club, he still had like Wolf of Wall Street or like an Interstellar or some of these other things that he was still he's consistently doing. But once you get to officially like Dark Tower, Not Giving a Fuck, and this, I think it officially marks just like, well, now you just have a regular career. You're not in the wave of this comeback anymore.
Even though he was in my least favorite theatrical performance of the year, Jason Clarke was probably the best in the movie. You fucking hate him.
Jason Clarke is this weird guy where he takes so many bad movies that I don't know if he's like a good actor and with a terrible agent.
Because he got a potato face. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, he does.
He does, right? Like, he looks like a potato. Like, it's really weird. He's really odd looking. He's never handsome, but he's never like wholly ugly. Like he's like a guy you'd picture walking to like a sailor bar, and he's the guy who's fought everybody in the bar. You know what I mean?
He's like the middle ground barometer for how you can tell like either attractive, not attractive. He's like the exact middle point, like when you do like your video game character to speak to the theme of the movie, and you're like at the exact middle of every single feature you could possibly do. You characterize your character. That's Jason Clarke.
That's Jason Clarke's face.
Exactly. Did you agree with the sentiment that he's the best of the cast, Brianna?
I guess he was pretty committed. I don't know. I feel like every actor was giving like a fine performance. Like even Anne Hathaway, who I like shit on Twitter like a couple days ago. Like I actually like found her like kind of entertaining. Going back to Jason Clarke, apparently Jason Clarke plays a lot of cucks. And he's like a cuck in this movie, isn't he?
I mean, basically, yes. He keeps constantly not recognizing any shadiness at all. Even when you're like beat up at the end of the movie, when he's just totally like out of it, you figure he would say at just some point like, why the fuck is this happening? Like he says something, like there's that point where he's like, why are you calling him by his first name? And like that's it. That's the first time there's like 5 minutes left in the movie.
But that's the worst part about the movie and all the characters in general. Like you say, I can't believe this guy wouldn't think of that. It doesn't matter because they're all fucking video game characters. Of course they don't think of it. They have no free will, no free thought, no anything. So it literally gives the author play to make these bizarre characters do whatever the fuck they want with no consequence. It's stupid. The only character you should care about really, because of the story, is the son, and they do dick with him. What is the point of this fucking movie? Honestly, what is the point? There's no referential, like, oh man, maybe I spent too much plugged in. Maybe I should go outside a little more. Oh man, maybe I should like learn to accept who I am. No, it's none of it.
You would figure, like, the most interesting thing about this movie when that twist is revealed isn't about, like, Matthew McConaughey's been a video game character this whole time, as much as now he has sentience that he is a video game character.
Yeah.
Why not play with that? Like, your son has created artificial intelligence that recognizes that it is inside of a, like, technical construct. And there's, like, so much you could do with it. I wish almost they just abandoned the stupid story about killing the stepdad, and just had him, like, try to escape like he's in the Matrix. Like, at this point, just, like, go fucking buck wild with it. Go somewhat crazy. They kind of do that with, like, Jason Clarke's weird death, where he gets dragged by the fucking tuna named Justice into the water. It's like, I almost wish they went into more of that thing. Like, Matthew McConaughey is almost just, like, wants to break the video game. Like any person who, like, first gets a video game does, which is, like, I want to see the boundaries and see how much I can screw with, like, whatever parameters I have. She just fucking done that with Matthew McConaughey just breaking with the reality that he's in completely.
Wait, so is the son actually in a mental institution at the end? Was that real, or was that a part of the game?
That's another problem, is that you can't quite tell.
Yeah, like, that was weird. Like, cause I don't even fucking know. I had no fucking idea.
Because they draw so many little, like, difference between the real world and the video game world.
Yeah.
Just alive. And then when you do find out, it just only confuses you about, like, so is Anne Hathaway getting beaten here, or is she inside of the boat with Matthew McConaughey and that weird, like, Denny from The Room kid who suddenly shows up at the end of this movie?
Oh, the kid that just appears.
It's just like, Diane Lane told me you need somebody to help you on the boat. Which I do love, especially when he just randomly shows up. It's just like, oh, I hid myself in the barracks or some shit, and I'm just here. I just really want Matthew McConaughey to murder that kid, just like we can't have any witnesses immediately. I wish it was just more of that stuff to, like, try and kind of break the constructs of the video game. There's a few kind of moments where they do something like that. Like, there's a bit where Matthew McConaughey's walking and the camera moves around him like the camera in a video game.
I hated that. Oh, I hated it.
Because it's weird, because, like, that happens very early on in the movie, and it already hints to you what Brianna's talking about. Like, if you knew the twist going in, you would say, like, oh, why did no one ever realize this? If you've ever played a video game in the last 10 years, you can kind of see this coming.
The way that opening shot is done with the kid at his computer playing the video game, and then the way the camera, like, goes into his eye, and then you're in the world of the movie, I thought, like, even if I didn't already know what happens, I feel like that opening shot is just a dead giveaway. Like, that, they're literally showing you that the world is in this kid. Like, literally, physically showing you that.
Right, exactly. There's no mystery. Like, you're like, oh, okay. So this is all in his imagination. Like, instantly, it's all in his head.
Yeah.
Who the fuck was surprised by this?
Well, I think it's only because, as Brianna mentioned, this is a classic example of, like, a fuck you, it's January movie, where it's dumped out there, and I just think the few people who saw Serenity, like, because this didn't have any, like, critic screenings or much promotion of any kind, Everyone Pictures really wanted to bury this movie, because of, like, all these bad test screenings that were happening. I really wouldn't be surprised if it was just, like, the 5 people that bought tickets on, like, the Thursday night showings just walked in. No one assumed that this movie would be dumb enough to do that twist, and the movie challenged their expectations at every turn.
I think that's kind of what it is. It's like, I feel like everyone just thought it was going to be just like some regular January, just boring kind of melodrama. And then this video game twist really kind of, like, I guess, threw them off in the moment. Because, like, a lot of critics that I know were also, like, very surprised, like, not just, like, normal, like, everyday, like, movie-going audience. Like, they were still, like, surprised by it, because I think they just went in with, like, a certain expectation of what this kind of movie was going to be, and that was just not what it was.
To be fair, if you told me, like, here's this thriller starring Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway, and it's like a thriller released in January, I would not immediately jump to, oh, it's going to be a video game twist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't think there's going to be any sort of, like, you know, like, surprising twist. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that from, like, the poster or anything.
No, any of the trailers didn't reveal any of that. And then even if you're like halfway through this movie before they even say the twist, you're like, they're not gonna do this, right? They're not. That's not gonna happen, and it does happen.
Okay, maybe that's right. If I wasn't looking for the twist, maybe even with the opening spelled out in front of you shot, I might not have picked up on it. Who the fuck knows what's happening here? I'll give them credit for the balls to reveal their main fucking crux of the movie an hour in, but why? What was the decision behind that even? The only thing you had going for you is this bullshit twist. Why do it?
No, yeah, they just got really antsy, it feels like. They're just like, oh, we got this here, and we're in the middle of this boring fucking thriller movie.
Don't leave. Check it out.
That's almost what it feels like. But I think we've exhausted all of our talk on Serenity here. So we'll start with, Brianna, your final thoughts on Serenity, if you have any left.
A waste of my time. Just a waste of my time. An hour and 46 minutes I'm not getting back.
Well, it got you on this lovely podcast, and aren't you so happy about it?
That's true. Okay, there's one positive.
Would you say this is definitely the worst one you've seen this year?
No, not at all. It's like still way better than like quite a few movies I saw.
What would you say is the worst one you've seen this year, out of curiosity?
I'm actually on my Letterboxd right now. There's like a movie I saw at Tribeca and then a movie I saw at New York Film Festival. I doubt either of you have heard of them. One is called Gully and one is called I Was at Home But. And those were like my two worst movies of the year. But then before that, my two worst movies of the year are Dark Phoenix and The Highwaymen.
Yeah, Dark Phoenix I can especially get.
Awful. Just that, actually, that was a literal nightmare.
Dark Phoenix I didn't even bother with. What the fuck?
Well, Adam, while you got the floor now, while you're still on the floor, your final thoughts on Serenity.
I'll just repeat what I just said. Serenity, what the fuck? Why? It is an ultimately forgettable movie. The twist to me isn't even that shocking to like be like, oh yeah, but to remember it. It's just garbage. It's just, this movie was made for no one. This movie was made for the writer and director. That's the only reason. I can't understand anybody who would be into this movie. And everyone's opinion is their own, but I just don't see what this movie offers to anyone.
Well, yeah, I agree with what both of you are saying in terms of how quite terrible it is. And it's that weird thing where I've talked about, since we do bad movies all the time, the sort of three different types of movies are genuinely just completely awful, so bad they're good, and then studio train wreck bad, where you're just like, how the fuck did this happen? How many people either didn't come in to stop being what it is, or the exact opposite, how many, just like too many cooks in the kitchen. And this falls somewhere in between just genuinely bad and too many cooks in the kitchen, like studio train wreck bad, where it's just like, I'm only enthralled in this because I can't believe you're doing what the fuck you're doing on any level. Why any of these people are here, why Matthew McConaughey got nude for this. Then again, he probably just wanted to do it anyway. I'm sure that was suggested on the day. He's like, can I get nude and just get into the water and talk to my weird kind of son? I guess because I'm a video game projection of his father. All this shit that's just like, it's the only kind of interest you might have is just the bafflement that it exists at all. And that's our talk on Serenity. And before we get to our next film, here is an ESO show you can queue up right after our podcast.
Do you enjoy pop culture? Of course you do. You're already listening to Pop Culture Podcasts here on the ESO Network. The Rusted Robot Podcast discusses movies, trailers, TV shows, space and robot news, and so much more. Won't you please join us for a pop culture overload wherever you listen to podcasts? TheRustedRobot.podbean.com, a proud partner of the Soulforge Podcast here on the ESO Network.
The Rusted Robot Podcast. Think about it.
All right, now let's get into our good feature, The Irishman.
Hello?
Is that Frank?
Yes.
Hiya, Frank. This is Jimmy Hoffa. Well, there's a situation going on now, Frank.
You might be demonstrating a failure to show appreciation.
Sooner or later, everybody put here as a date when he's gonna go.
Would you like to be a part of this history?
Yes, I would. Whatever you need me to do, I'm available.
So The Irishman, obviously, is the latest film from Martin Scorsese. Reunites him with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. It's his first one with Al Pacino, and there's a huge amount of people in the cast. It's written by Steve Zalian, based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt, which is based on the actual, or at least alleged tellings of the real-life person Frank Sheeran, who was involved in the mob in Philadelphia, and probably bullshitted a lot, which I've heard some people say have issue with this movie about, like Frank Sheeran is just completely out of whack. He's just puffing himself up. But I feel weirdly like that kind of fits perfectly into the narrative of this movie. That's just a complete, almost ego trip for a man who has absolutely nothing, which I find really fascinating. Only adds to me with that movie. Would you agree, Brianna, as a big fan of the film?
I only recently saw the thing about how Frank is like an unreliable narrator, and I briefly skimmed through another article. I think that was like talking about how the circumstances surrounding Jimmy Hoffa's death or lack thereof are just like so murky, and it's hard to know what Frank Sheeran in real life, you know, what he made up and what is fact. I feel like anytime you watch a movie through the eyes of one like narrator telling you the story of what happened, I feel like they're automatically unreliable and biased, and you're only seeing, you know, a part of the story and one perspective, really. And I saw another thing, something about the way that Frank being the only perspective of the story also adds to the way the women in the story are portrayed as like an afterthought. Like Peggy doesn't speak a lot in the movie, and they're barely there because this movie is through Frank's perspective, and because like they were barely there to him, so they're barely there to us, the audience.
No, it's totally fine. Believe me, the moment I knew that this was going to end up being the movie, thanks to the poll, I was just like, I'm so glad I picked Brianna for this.
Yeah!
Because when I started following you on Twitter, it was right before you started going full Irishman crazy. Now I know you're in your uncut gems phase.
Woo!
This recording, which I haven't seen yet. I'm very jealous. I can't wait till Christmas and I get to see it. But anyway, I want to also hear from Adam, because unlike Brianna and myself, you didn't get a chance to see this before our recording. You actually held off on doing it because you picked it here. And you're like, I want to wait until we can confirm that it's going to be the pick that we do for the show, all 3.5 hours of it. And what'd you think of it, Adam?
Let me preface with, as we talked about on the Scorsese episode, I am a huge Scorsese fan. And we've talked about it on other episodes. I'm also a huge Pacino fan. I'm a huge De Niro fan. I'm a huge Pesci fan. I love these guys. So to see them all together at the age they are now in the twilights of their career in one film, A, was amazing. B, just some of the best performances I've seen this year. Actually, maybe the last 10 years in this film. I really did love the movie. Love might be strong. I really liked the movie. I do have a couple issues with it. But hold on now. You know,
put down your blowtorch for now, Brianna.
Hold on. No, I really do love the movie. I think it's great. I do think there's a point where it should have ended, and they kept going. But the digital de-aging, god damn, is it weird.
I was gonna finish that for you and say, it was good.
Well, my thing is, it's young De Niro's face on a clearly 70-year-old De Niro's body. So it's like when he beat up the grocery clerk.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? This is just weird looking to me. Like this, I can't handle this. Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Young Kurt Russell's face was on a different younger man's body. Like it's completely believable.
I think I'll say this much. I agree with you to some extent, but it's more of like, I would say it hits 3 out of 4 times. And that 1 out of 4 times that it doesn't work for me is usually when De Niro's in daylight and it's like just certain shots where it's like, because it works so much better when like that cascade in shadow or different things, or on Pacino and Pesci, because they're playing older guys anyway. And I think that works the best where it's like, we're making this like 70-year-old guy look like he's 45. That works a lot better than making De Niro in his 70s look kind of like, especially in that one flashback where it's him in World War II, and it just looks like, oh man, I'm playing as Robert De Niro in Call of Duty 7 or whatever.
Yeah.
That's the worst example. But otherwise, I think it works better than not. And I'm guessing based on your cries of anger, Brianna, you agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, like, I mean, I don't think it's great, but I don't think any, like, de-aging is like great. There's always going to be the issue where their faces just look too plasticky. And I watched these like the VFX artists react to corridor videos, and I like them because the VFX artists just talk about what makes they talk about the art of VFX, which I find really interesting, and they talk about what has to go into recreating a face to make it look real, and so much of it has to do with like getting the pores on our face right, and because without them the face will just look too plastic, and for what they did a really good job. I mean, it's still, I feel like no fucking de-aging can get those like pores right. They're never going to be perfect. There's always going to be that little like plasticky look. But when I saw it in the theater for the first time, like I noticed it right away, especially with De Niro. But then after the war scene, which is like super fast, I mean, that's like the most, I feel like, egregious CGI because they had to make him look the youngest. But it lasts like 5 seconds and then it's done. And then the rest of the movie is like fine. I didn't even notice Pesci and Pacino. I thought they were great, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Pesci are the best. Like, I just thought, oh, they dyed his hair.
Yeah.
I agree. I will say this too, and maybe it's because I grew up with De Niro and I'm such a huge fan, as I'm sure both of you are too. The blue eyes too.
Oh, yeah.
It was a little weird for me. Maybe that's what threw me off the most, because I'm like,
yes,
it's like he's got glaucoma. Like, what the fuck?
I think it does. I think it does add to it. Because I actually had to point it out to my friend when I saw it, and he hadn't noticed it, but I noticed it the whole time, and I think it does add to like a bit of an uncanniness with him. Like, you always know something is not quite right with his face.
I think a big part that we're not really talking about is the fact that this is extremely innovative in terms of you look at any of the behind the scenes stuff. Like, I watched Netflix recently put out like an in conversation thing where it's Pacino, Pesci, Scorsese, and De Niro talking about the movie for like 20 minutes. And they talk about the fact that they were originally going to do this at a point where they would have had to have tennis balls, like the little round things on their faces, and Scorsese's like, I need these guys to be natural, and that's just going to be really fucking stupid if they have to talk to each other with tennis balls. So they actually had to they waited out the technology. Part of the reason this was in production for so long and they had to pause it for a bit was they had to create this whole system where like they had so many cameras, because Scorsese likes shooting with at least a couple cameras on set, and each of those cameras had 3 different lenses to track all these faces and stuff with only a limited amount of dots like on their faces, which is amazing. Like, they're completely like shifting this technology in a different way with this movie. So I can kind of forgive a bit more of like, oh, hey, some of this doesn't always look the best, but in any case, it doesn't really matter nearly as much because the actual craft and the story and the acting and everything else just really blows any concerns about that out of the water.
Yeah, I felt like I didn't even really have much of an issue with the de-aging, but I feel like it's so easily overshadowed by literally everything else the movie's doing. It doesn't even matter. I don't know how anyone can be really that distracted by it.
Well, especially because it's all in like the first hour of this 3.5 hour long movie anyway, really.
Most
it's like,
of the, yeah.
Most of the more egregious examples, and by that time you've like completely forgotten about it. And so, Brianna, I did want to ask, so given your love of this movie, are you a huge Scorsese fan in general? And if so, how do you feel this kind of fits with his career?
I love everything I've seen from Martin Scorsese. I have not, I don't think I've watched nearly enough. Like, I've seen all of his recent stuff. Like, I've seen Hugo, Wolf of Wall Street. I haven't seen Silence. I've seen Taxi Driver and Goodfellas and Shutter Island, and like I've seen a lot, but I'm definitely like way behind. But I mean, I'm a fan of like everything I've seen. I love Martin Scorsese. What was the rest of your question, sir?
Well, yes, you, the lone hero in the back. I was just asking, like, so how do you feel this, based on what you've seen of his previous career, how do you think, like, how much of this feels so reflective, especially with, like, a Goodfellas? You would argue this feels pretty reflective on, like, especially his mob movies, like Goodfellas and all that.
People saying that, like, oh, this is just another mob movie. I mean, it's not really what the movie is about. And I mean, you could argue that any of his movies about the mob are not really what like the movie is about. Like, I don't think he's, especially this fucking movie, I don't think he's glorifying the mob. The movie I wrote in my recap of like my favorite movies of the year, like the movie is about when you give your life to something that doesn't care about you and like what you lose when that happens. It's not about, glorifying the mob or, oh, the mob is cool. Like, that's just like an extra added little like bit of fun. I think to say that the movie is in any respect trying to make the mob look fun or glorifying it, of this movie in particular, is just wildly out of touch with what you've seen. And I've seen so many bad takes where people think that, and I'm like, you really just sat there for 210 minutes? This movie that ends with like a sad old man who's lost everyone in his life, and he needs the door open like a little bit because it reminds him of his good boy Jimmy Hoffa. Like, you really, like, you end that movie and that's what you think, that this movie was just a fun grand old time of like men hanging out and killing each other. Like, oh my God, get fucked.
No, I definitely agree with. Actually, I think most of Scorsese's movies, if not all the ones that particularly deal with the mafia, do not glorify it.
Yeah.
They show just it fucks you.
Right.
Like, these people do not care about it. It's all about crime. I'd argue people who talk about like the glorious mob movies, that would be like a Scarface or the Godfather movies or things like that, where they show these people, living lives of luxury and all that. These people in this movie are seedy, backstabbing sons of bitches who don't care about anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I do agree. The one thing about the movie that really kind of hit me was De Niro is a broken down old man. Like, he's by himself. He's on crutches. He's falling in the hallway. He's got no one there. His kids don't want to talk to him. He's talking to a priest and he doesn't want to confess to him. He's got to have the door open at night. All this bullshit. And yet, when you go in the past, this dude was a merciless killer who did anything that the mafia asked him to do. He lived his life on blood money, and look where it got him. Alone and afraid. I don't want to say it's a tragic story because he's not a redeemable character. I mean, at all.
No.
He was a murderer who literally killed fathers and in front of their children. I mean, that's what he did. But it just goes to show that, even this stylized lifestyle and these idols that we make out of these criminals and the mafiosos or whatever you want to call them, these guys are just fucking guys. They're just fucking errand boys at the end of the day who literally do not reap any benefits from any of the shit they do. Fucking Joe Pesci in this movie. Goddamn.
It's so unlike like what we know Joe Pesci as. Like, this
100%.
is...
And I'm like, why isn't Joe Pesci still acting more? God damn it, he's so fucking good. And then Ray Muppet voice Romano. Like, how good is he in this too?
So good.
What the fuck?
No, and it's a cast full of so many like phenomenal people, like Bobby Cannavale or my favorite of like sort of like the non like bigger people, Stephen Graham from Boardwalk Empire.
Oh my God, he's so good. I love Stephen Graham.
He's so phenomenal, especially in this movie where he's constantly got to like act up against Pacino, particularly in that great scene in the Miami restaurant where they're arguing each other about like being late and all this other stuff. He goes toe to toe with him so perfectly, and I heard that apparently the whole like 12 and a half bit was him just being so nervous about being with Pacino that he's like going over to De Niro, like, can you give me a bit of a life raft? And he's like, yeah, 12 and a half works great. Like, that's fun.
Yeah,
like,
I read that. Yeah.
He's so good. I always know him from like Snatch. I always remember him. But holy fuck is he good. And he's genuinely kind of intimidating in this. Like the way he just kind of stares at him with those black eyes he's got, even though they are contacts as well. But he's very, very intimidating. And to throw another bone, dude, fucking Pacino. Oh. Jesus Christ. This is like the perfect balance of young Pacino and old Pacino. You know what I mean? Where he's over the top and crazy, but he's still understated. Like, he brings it, you guys are fucking killing me. You killed me. That's it. I'm going to jail.
And admittingly, a phenomenal performance from him. My favorite bit is definitely him just like, on his fucking father's. He repeats it so many times, and he's just like, I'm going to prison. You realize this? I'm going to prison. Like, he just breaks it. It's so perfect. And it's especially great because the three main guys in here, like you mentioned, Joe Pesci hasn't been in a movie in so long, and Pacino and De Niro have been acting in the last, like, 25 years. But this is, like, easily their best performance in ages for any of them.
I mean, without a doubt.
I'm trying to think of the last, like, dirty grandpa movie that De Niro has been in before this. When I say any dirty grandpa like movie, I mean that, and then that other movie that he was in, I think.
The Dirty Grandpa Cinematic Universe, we're all aware of.
Dirty yeah, that.
Like the Intern and the Meet the Parents movies.
Oh,
yeah. He made him a lot of his more recent works just being sort of like a parody of himself, or just completely not giving shit whatsoever. I mean, but...
Wait, guys, wait. Well, he was in Joker this year. How could I forget? Oh, my God.
Yeah, you get it, because that's a reference to another Scorsese movie.
Oh, well then, yeah, there we go. So the last good role that he was in that wasn't Dirty Grandpa was Joker. All right, we settled it. It's solved. Mystery solved.
All settled, no argument with that whatsoever. To go back to something you were talking about earlier, Adam, in terms of just like the sort of the deconstructing of the mob, what I love so much is the first hour of this movie, I would argue, kind of feels like sort of his older Goodfellas style with like the quick montages, a lot of just like sort of like the rise into the mob. But ingeniously, like with each hour, it becomes less and less flashy until you get to the last hour of this movie, which is masterful in terms of how unflashy it is. Like anything from when Joe Pesci tells him like you gotta go and kill Huffa, and the just methodical, slow pace of him like getting in the car with Jesse Plemons and the other guy, and it's like the fish thing, and then picking up Huffa. So much tension and dread in complete nothingness happening. It's so masterfully done.
Exactly, and even to the point to where when the movie starts, within like the first hour, it's classic Scorsese. It's got the the rock music or the music of the time and all this shit, like real bombastic, and then it slowly sort of fades out. It really does, to where the last, like you said, hour of this movie, there's like no music. It's real quiet and real monologue heavy, which he always does, but it becomes a real personal sort of story about one man instead of all these other characters, which was really smart too, where instantly when characters are introduced, he died from 6 shots to the head in an alley.
Right, yeah.
Like, you already know the fate of all these guys before it happens. Even if you don't know the actual story of Jimmy Hoffa, they give it to you right then and there. And I think that was a very smart play on his part. And let's face it, the fact that this, yes, it did have a limited theatrical run, but the fact that this is a fucking Netflix movie, are you out of your fucking mind? What is happening with the state of cinema? Like, honestly.
Well, it's just a tragic thing of, like, Scorsese has said that, like, he tried to get this made with several different studios, and none of them wanted to front, like, the, what was it, like, $150 million budget to, like, do all the de-aging and all this other stuff, and the salaries of everybody involved, and the production design and all this other stuff. At the same time, it's something where, like, I appreciate at least that, like, Netflix, for as many issues as I might have with, like, how they don't promote things, all this other stuff, they put so much into The Irishman. Like, even the fact that I was able to see this in the theater, even in like here, like I got to see it in the old historical landmark theater, was like.
So you both saw it in theaters?
Yeah.
Both of you did?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's right. You know what? I'll go fuck myself. You guys go ahead. You guys go ahead and finish the episode. Fuck me, right?
I could project it on my wall at home, guys. Whatever. It's the same thing.
To feel better, my screening was like fucked up. Like the sound was like fucked up the entire time. So like it was actually better. It was better when I watched it at home.
It doesn't. I had a 4-year-old constantly bothering me while I was watching it. Daddy, why are you watching this? I don't like this. Go to your room.
I just at least do appreciate like Netflix like at least has the weird sort of fuck you money in its own way to be like, we'll front the Scorsese movie, whatever. We're millions of dollars in debt. We don't give a shit. We're going to allow a filmmaker to do this and at least give him like the over a 30-day theatrical window, which they never do for any other movie.
Yeah.
So I at least give them that much with it, and that they were even able to make this a thing, because this has been, like I said, in production for like a decade or so. They kept saying like, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to get Pacino and Pesci back, especially Pesci, because he hadn't been in the movie in like a decade?
It's like 2 decades, I think. I think I read it was like 20 or 25 years.
He quit in like 99, and then in 2010 he did a random comedy with Helen Mirren where he runs a bordello that I only found out about because of doing research for this episode.
That's right. No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And then he quit for another 10 years, and then he did this movie.
Oh, shit. Oh, man.
He's so fucking good in this movie. The thing is, his performance is so good that there is no question that whatever room he's in, he is in charge.
Right.
That's how good he is.
Oh, yeah.
And yet he's kind and soft-spoken and really bother to like him. And it's really like, no, don't worry about it. You're with me. You're never going to get hurt. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't do anything, but there's no question that he is the most dangerous man in the room.
Right, the tragic element of this, while I do agree that, like, these guys are all, they made the bed that they're going to lie in alone and old and terrible and cold. But at the same time, the tragedy is just, like, when you actually get the scenes of, like, Hoffa and Frank, or Frank and Russell Buffalino, when you get them interacting with each other, the tragedy is, like, if they met under completely different circumstances, these could all be, like, men who are genuine, like, loyal friends forever. If it was just under completely different circumstances, because they have a great chemistry with each other. But the thing is, the trappings all around this end up completely, like, screwing them over all by their own design. I think that's the tragedy there. It's more of like a human general tragedy that's there with it. And also just, watching De Niro be that old is like the most scary horror film of 2019. Because just like, Jesus fucking Christ.
They drag that out. Like, the scene where he falls is just like horrible. Like, I watched it with my parents next to me, and like my dad is like, he just turned 71, and I was like sitting there like watching him watching it, and I was like, oh fuck, my dad's getting old. Like, that could be my dad in like 10 years. And they just draw that scene out. Like, you watch him fall and like crumple up on the floor, and then immediately he's in the nursing home, and it's horrific and devastating.
Especially when it gets down to, like, this scene that completely broke me down in the theater was him at the bank trying to get Pac-Man's attention. Because, like, there's a basic human tragedy that immediately hits you of just like, oh my god, that's so upsetting to see De Niro with those freaking canes on his arm and him just, like, awkwardly shuffling back out after she completely shuts him out. But at the same time, you're also thinking, like, well, he made this bed.
Right.
There's so much there. And you kind of talked about this earlier, Brianna, about the whole Anna Paquin element of it all has received, to quote you, various bad takes. And why don't you explain to everybody out there why it's such a bad take that she has a lesser role in this movie because she doesn't have that many lines?
Well, it's because people are like quantifying the importance of a woman's presence in a film with how many lines she says. And I feel like, for one, that reduces a woman's presence in a film to, like, a number. So that's just bullshit from the get-go. I did see a really good take that basically tried to interrogate how women have been portrayed in mob films, and, like, I think also, like, how women have probably been treated in the mob as, afterthoughts. And if this film is culpable because if it does the same thing that these other films do by also addressing it, like, it's addressing it and acknowledging what these other films have done, but, like, does that free it of doing that thing, or does that make it culpable? And it wasn't, being like, oh, her role isn't important, but it was an interesting question. But I mean, her role in the film is she's like the conscience, she sees everything that Frank has done. She is ever watchful. And at the same time, her silence, as I said earlier, is also a byproduct of the fact that this is Frank's story. So for Frank, Peggy and all the women in his life are afterthoughts. So for us, they are also an afterthought. I saw another thing. I was saying how it was so much easier for her to digest Jimmy Hoffa and see him as more of like a father figure, because the whole time, she knows what Jimmy does and that he's associated with her father, and he does maybe like even worse things than her father. But it's like, when it comes down to it, Frank was the man who she saw assault and curb stomp or whatever, crush a man's finger against a curb, like when she was a child. Like, she saw that ugliness, whereas Jimmy Hoffa is, nothing but kind and sweet and fatherly and has ice cream with her. It's different.
Frank, like, at the end of the movie, talks to one of his other daughters about just like, well, I was trying to protect you. And it's like, what are you protecting us from? If anything, like, it's more that he protected them from this world by completely closing them off from him as a person.
Yes.
Which is so fascinating. Because it weirdly kind of fits into something that, like, if you're a fan of De Niro, you know that if you've ever seen him attempt to do an interview, it's the most cringy, awkward thing ever because he doesn't speak at all by himself. Like, he can't talk on his own. I think he puts that sort of natural awkwardness that he has in his normal life into this part where it's just like, oh, the only way I know how to communicate with my daughters or my wife or any of these other people is through like doing basic tasks like, oh, I'll go to bowling, but I'll sit over here and talk to Joe Pesci. I'm really not going to talk to like my wife or my daughters or anything like that because he feels so closed off, maybe because of his like issues like post-war. He feels he's just kind of like closed off because of like the sins that are already there and those sins he continues to perpetrate afterward. It feels as if he's just like, I can't relate to you as a human, but I can quote unquote protect you like I'm a knight guarding like a tower. And that ends up just completely alienating him from his entire family, especially Anna Paquin, or I don't remember the younger actress's name who plays her when she's a little kid, but her fucking piercing giant eyes just say so much in like any of those scenes where, like you mentioned, the big sort of curb stomping scene, or when even they're just like eating dinner and she's like looking up at him with that dough face. It just says so much about how she doesn't consider her father a person as much as just like an object in the room at any point.
Or her fear of Joe Pesci's character and the scene of them at Christmas where he gives her the ice skates and she very hesitantly says thank you, and then he's like, look, there's something else there for you, and it's $100 bill, and she just doesn't say anything, and Frank is like, say thank you, and Joe Pesci is like, she said it once, like, he knows she knows, and then her lack of saying thank you is just, there's so much to that, you know, like, she knows what that money is from, she knows what he's trying to do, get her to like him, and like, I mean, I feel like there's some purity to him trying to get her to like him, but she knows what comes with that, you know?
Right, because he at least has the acknowledgement of like, look, I can't have kids with my wife, and I would give anything to have what you have, Frank, with this beautiful gift that you have with any of your daughters. Anything like that. He at least acknowledges like, this is something I can never have, and I can at least be appreciative of it from this stance, versus Frank is just like, oh, I had that immediately in front of me. I'm going to go fuck up with Jimmy Hoffa, you know, and just do whatever. But Adam, you haven't gotten to talk that much about this. Do you agree with our sentiments?
I absolutely do. One thing I do want to bring up, though, because we're on the subject of De Niro, and you guys were talking about the scenes that kind of made you break. That fucking phone call.
Oof.
Oh. When he's stammering and stuttering, which he does throughout the whole movie, which, great choice, by the way. But that phone call to Joe Hoffa, I mean, I'm literally watching going, oh my God, this is fucking, oh my God. And I felt sympathy for that character in that moment. Like I said earlier, he's a completely unsympathetic character, but that moment, it literally like floored me. That's how good the writing is, the acting is, the story is in this movie. It's just a beautiful scene. And that also gives credence to what you guys were talking about earlier, where, you know, that day when he made that phone call was the last time he saw his daughter talk to him, that day.
Mm-hmm.
Because she knew, oh yeah, my dad fucking killed Jimmy Hoffa. In the context of the film, he killed Jimmy Hoffa. Did it happen? Who the hell knows?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But in the context of the film, yeah, he did, and they had that, you know, loving relationship. So, I mean, it was just, fuck, what a scene. I mean, fucking hell. Why?
It's a pretty good movie, right? Yeah.
It's a monument. Well, it's a monument. It's a monumental movie. It really is. You get Scorsese, who arguably birthed his own genre of film with the mafia epic. You get the master of the genre he had a hand in creating, delivering a film starring the titans of the genre at their age, and they are all firing on all cylinders. There's no bad performance in this film. There's no bad editing choice.
You mentioned the editing aspect of it, but at the beginning, you did talk about there was a point where you felt the film should have ended.
It's about a half hour too long.
Oh my God, the last half hour though has all the tragic stuff we're talking about.
No. That's the last half hour shouldn't be there. What I'm saying is it's a little too long. Maybe there could have been a little bit more tightening.
But what would you get out though? What would you possibly delete from this?
Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah, what would you take out? What do you think should be there?
Yeah, what do you think? Come on.
The World War II scene, I don't care if it's a minute or 30 seconds, that can go. That's fine.
No, it needs to be there.
There-
It's part of Martin Scorsese's design.
I'm arguing with two people who gave this fucking movie 5 stars. What the fuck? All right, let's put it this way. It felt like at the end they tried to redeem an irredeemable character.
No. If anything, he's wildly condemned to a remaining life of suffering and.
You don't think that they were baiting for sympathy for the character?
No, his life is miserable.
I feel like the goal is to be like, oh, look at this. Well, maybe not Scorsese's goal, but I could see where it'd be like, oh, this poor guy.
Well, I mean, you have a bit of that in terms of just like basic human empathy, but the interesting thing is the movie constantly presents him as somebody who lacks that. That's what's so fascinating. Is you feel empathy, but you're constantly reminded, even during that last half hour, that he has no empathy whatsoever. Like when he's talking to the priest.
Yes, I was just thinking that. Yeah.
That's such a fucked up moment where he's just like, well, do you feel any remorse? He's like, well.
That scene snapped me back. Because after he shot Hoffa, spoiler, but after he shot Hoffa, I'm like, well, I think we're kind of good here. Because you got like 20 minutes of, well, I don't, whatever. But then the scene with him and the priest, I'm like, oh, okay, no, you're not supposed to care about this motherfucker. But what I'm saying is, I think that last half hour is why it's getting such love it or hate it reviews. I really.
I think most of the reviews love it.
I love like the high pitched dog whistle sound you just made.
I'm not saying the three of us don't love it. I'm saying I could see why the people who don't, I think it's maybe the last half hour that kills it for them. I really do.
What Brianna was talking about, where some people were saying the glamorizing element of it, it feels like people turned it off maybe halfway through. And it's just like, yeah, I give the rest of it whatever. It's going to be a Scorsese movie. It's going to be flash, bang, bang. But, like, everything, like, after that Hoffa death sequence, like, it's so drawn out, but that's so totally the point and completely debilitates that take of like, oh, it's totally aggrandizing the mob, down to him going to fucking Action Bronson's Coffins Are Us.
Action Bronson's Coffins.
I want that commercial now. Action Bronson's Coffins.
Yes, oh fuck, somebody make this please.
Buy 2 get 1 free. It's a great deal. We got a Christmas sale. Everybody must go in the coffin. But like that scene especially, I think really crystallizes it, where he is just saying like, oh, hey, we got this and like, who's it for? Me. Oh, fuck. But what do you see? What do you like? Like, I think that does such a great job of selling the dark humor, which we haven't talked about that much. Like, this movie's really fucking funny. Like, throughout most of, like, it's surprisingly funny, like, especially earlier on. Like, that just shows, like, the dark humor and the sort of inherent human tragedy, but not the tragedy or sympathy for Frank specifically. Just more the process of, like, well, fuck, if you grow old and you've completely shut everyone out of your life, even if it's not through mob ties, if it's just, like, through your own bullshit, any person would have some basic empathy of, like, oh, fuck, that's a terrible way to end your fucking life. That's the most miserable way possible. Him picking out his own fucking, like, grave thing in that one that one cemetery, I forgot, it's like all the walls and shit.
Mausoleum.
Yeah, the mausoleum, right. It just sells so much of that. I really doubt anybody who actually watched the whole movie would genuinely think like, oh, that's aggrandizing the mob.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I don't think this movie aggrandizes the mob at all. I mean, these people, it just shows, they had their fingers in politics, they had their fingers in everything, and none of it ever worked for them. Like I said earlier, the flashes of their names on screens, all these people died horrible, murderous deaths, either, in alleyways or on street corners or any unglamorous fucking deaths or in prison. It's nothing ever good came from any of these people, any of the mafia. And even these real guys, the ones who were involved with the Teamsters and the unions and everything, they all ended up dead. I don't think this movie glamorizes it at all. In fact, I think this movie is sort of almost the opposite of Goodfellas. Now, Goodfellas does show what happens to Henry Hill, but it does glamorize the mafia in a way. Or even Casino does in a way, all the money they get and everything else. This movie is almost the perfect counterpoint to that, to where none of that shit is going to get you anywhere. You're going to die alone and old.
Right, and even like with Goodfellas, it ends with like Henry Hill's like, well, I'm in witness protection, but at least I'm still alive and I'm in this house or whatever, and it ends there. As opposed to like this movie is the ingenious thing of like, well, if we followed Henry Hill up to his death, and we saw just like, oh, this guy had nobody in his life. I think that's what makes it so like essential after that point.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you.
Well, while you have the floor, Adam, I guess your final thoughts, if you can muster them about The Irishman.
I really like it. Is it my favorite Scorsese movie? Probably not. I mean, it's in my top 5 Scorsese movies, maybe my top 3 even. I do really, really enjoy all the performances in it. It really made me want to see Joe Pesci do more work. I think Joe Pesci absolutely steals the movie. It made me want more Harvey Keitel in the movie because I thought he was great, which we didn't mention him. I loved Ray Romano in it, which is crazy because I'm not a fan of his. And it's also a piece of history that I feel has been more and more forgotten as time goes on. Like, I grew up knowing somewhat about Jimmy Hoffa. Like, I wasn't alive during Jimmy Hoffa's days, but I remember there was a big joke like, oh, they found Jimmy Hoffa. Like, it's been in movies. I think it was even in The Simpsons, stuff like that. But a lot of people don't know about this thing that happened. Like, what the fuck? It's a huge part of American history. And I think this movie really does a good job of kind of, throwing that back out there. I really, really do think this is a great movie. I hope it's not Scorsese's last movie. But if it is, it's a good note to go out on.
I mean, it's also, he wants to keep working, but at the same time, it feels like this should be his last gangster movie, if nothing else.
I think so.
It does feel like sort of his final statement on that. I also do love, you mentioned about the sort of people forgetting about the past. Another great scene with what's-her-face from Orange is the New Black as the nurse.
Yes.
Yes, where she just talks about just like, oh yeah, who's that? It's like, oh, you Jimmy Hoffa? You probably don't know him. No, I don't. It's just like that adds another layer where it's like, oh, you might think, oh, at least people might remember me in terms of like legacy and history. You get forgotten. Doesn't fucking matter. But Brianna, your final thoughts on The Irishman?
Loved it. I love a good movie about men being horrible and interrogating their mortality. And it's hard to say exactly why I love it, but I like movies that are super like macho, guys being dudes, but at the heart of it all is a critique on, masculinity and men's relationships with one another, their relationships in this case with women as well. It's such a, it's such a tapestry. The film is such a tapestry of these men and their relationships and their legacy and their crimes. And I love a good long movie. And I just remember sitting in that theater when Frank turns around and shoots Jimmy, and just like, I just immediately started crying. Like, and that hug that they share between each other, like, it's not just a movie about guys being associated with each other in the mob. It's about, these real connections forged, and, the fact that this guy just fucking like betrayed everyone he loved for what? For money, for approval, and in the end, he has nothing. And I just think that's wonderful. The end.
Well said. But I mean, I obviously, like, I really do agree. I think people use this term a lot for like big epic movies, especially whenever they come out around sort of Oscar time from big directors. But this is one of the few examples where like this feels genuinely Shakespearean. And I mean that in terms of like how Shakespeare would take historical events and completely fuck with actual history. Like, if you actually look into any of his historical plays, he constantly just, like, mixes things up in terms of events and what actually might have happened and all this other stuff. But the fiction creates an interesting truth in its own right. And I think this one does such a phenomenal job of doing that, where even if Frank Sheeran probably lied out his ass for that fucking movie, for that book that this is based on, it doesn't matter, because it speaks to a more universal truth that we're all talking about just how if you live your life this way, you're going to end up getting completely screwed over. All these actors are at the top of their game. I wouldn't quite put it in the top 5 Scorsese movies, but at the same time, that just speaks to his career, that this phenomenal epic movie just isn't the absolute top tier. It just speaks to how talented and versatile and amazing that dude is. And with this movie, I think it's such a great sort of punctuation mark on a career about the fascination with what Brianna was talking about, especially that's all over Scorsese's work about men who forge really interesting, charismatic friendships in these dark circumstances that end up completely tethering that apart. And I think they do such a phenomenal job with that. And I think it's also interesting just in terms of like being a Scorsese nerd about certain things where like he's even sort of calling back to things that he did before. Like they play in the terms of the soundtrack, they play Pretend You Don't See Her as like an instrumental sad version, which was a song that was belted out in Goodfellas and by the singer who's depicted in this movie, Jerry Vale, who was in Goodfellas singing that song, is depicted as a character in this movie. And even Jim Norton pops up as Don Rickles, who was in Casino. Like it's so weird, like even on that sort of like historical context of Scorsese's career, or in terms of actual history, or in terms of just like the history of these actors, anything. There's so many different meta-contextual layers that are there. But at the same time, even on its own, it's just a great epic crime movie. And probably the best example of like sort of the fall from grace that something like a Godfather 3 failed to do. This is like the absolute 180 of like, this is how you actually do it, and do it pretty goddamn perfectly. But that is the end of our discussion on our two movies. And before we head out of here and we do our picking at the end of the episode, so stay tuned for that, we had some feedback to read because every Monday we ask you all about, hey, what are your favorite and least favorite things related to whatever topic we're doing? So we asked you all about favorite and least favorite movies from 2019. So we're going to go ahead and read some of these here, and then we're going to talk about it a bit. So first, from James Rodriguez, says, Honeyland, a documentary about beekeeping, which compiles 3 years' worth of footage, is an engaging 90 minutes. The Farewell, a masterclass in humor and emotion that resonated with me. Avengers Endgame, a fantastic season finale to the Infinity Saga, packed with emotion and badass moments. For least favorite, I'll only mention the shit heap, which is The Queen's Corgi. What's the Queen's Corgi, you ask? The Queen has a Corgi who's an entitled shit. Then Donald Trump appears and his dog sexually assaults the Corgi. The Corgi then ends up in a dog kennel where there's a dog addicted to cocaine, Canine Fight Club, and a bit of casual classism. All for kids. Scott Johnson says, Parasite, Us, The Farewell, The Lighthouse, and Booksmart are all in my top 5 as incredible films that I see no real flaws in. However, Parasite has to be number 1. I have to call it a masterpiece. The acting, direction, and brilliant script are all funny yet tragic in terms of its portrayal of class and wealth, with beautifully detailed characters and bends genres so well that it sticks out in a very tough year. For worst, I would say Ugly Dolls, which is a stupid and insipid animated movie from this year, with just as bad a concept in the songs as you would imagine. Undercover Brother 2 is a cheap, lazy, flat-out regressive comedy that takes away the throwback to blaxploitation from the first film and instead makes it a millennials or too sensitive film. And finally, Love is Blind, maybe one of the most single, baffling, pretentious, cobbled-together movies I've ever seen, and it has the strangest, unbelievable depiction of stuff like illness, trauma, autism, and suicide. It was shelved for 4 years, and I hope no one ever gets to watch it. It's this year's Collateral Beauty. Scott Crawford says Midsommar and Lords of Chaos are my favorites of the year, and I haven't seen many of the really bad ones, but I'll say Greta, just by process of elimination. Dan Chambo says, I really like Godzilla King of the Monsters, Avengers Endgame, Ford vs. Ferrari, and Joker. If I have to pick a bad one, it's only going to be my guilty pleasure, which was Terminator Dark Fate. I liked it, but I like the other 4 more than that one. Michael Gordon said, favorite, Avengers Endgame, Knives Out, and The Farewell, least favorite, Hellboy. Alex Autry says, favorite, Yesterday, least favorite, Alita Battle Angel. Barrett Valstick says, so I saw 2 movies one after the other that are my favorite and least favorite, right after each other. Favorite was Joker, least favorite was Gemini Man. And Larry Sternshine says, best, John Wick 3, worst, Six Underground. And I know, Brianna, you just put up a great article about your favorite movies of the year. But what were, some of those that maybe you didn't mention on that list or just in general that you really loved from 2019?
Yeah. I have some other ones that I really, really loved that were in my top 10 were The Beach Bum, High Life, Climax, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, The Death of Dick Long. I could keep going. I mean, I want to say in my 2019 ranked, which has almost 100 films, I think they start getting into I don't like this territory, not until about 40. So that's almost half. I loved a lot of really good movies this year.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, just to point out a few that weren't maybe mentioned on some of these lists, I loved Dolomite Is My Name, which is such a great comeback for Eddie Murphy, I thought. Or a really underrated one that no one's just talking about that I actually saw on a plane, The Art of Self-Defense.
Oh, yes.
Jesse Eisenberg, such a great movie. No one's
so good. I know.
For those who might be unaware, the basic premise is Jesse Eisenberg plays a guy who's kind of meek and awkward, and nobody likes him at work. Then he gets beat up in a like back alley thing while he's like trying to come back from the grocery store, and he takes up karate. And he finds out some really fucked up things about that karate school that I won't mention here, but especially the guy who plays his sensei is one of the most underrated performances of this year. He's so great. And I don't forgot the actor's name, but he's so phenomenal. And it's such a great dark satire movie that more people need to see. What about you, Adam? Any of the limited ones you've seen?
One of my favorites of the year, because it was finally, I felt the character was done right, was the Spider-Man Far From Home. Which I know, the Marvel movies, whatever, I don't care. To me, it was the best Spider-Man movie. Like, he felt like a teenager. It felt like the stakes were real, because he was trying to keep the girl and his friend and everything else. To me, that was a really, really well done comic book movie, and especially, like I said, a Spider-Man movie. As far as one of the worst for the year, I mean, like I said, Pet Sematary for sure. It felt like one of those, like, why were you making this?
Mm-hmm.
And to turn into what they did. I mean, what are we doing here? It's a zombie family. Like, this is just so stupid.
I had very conflicting opinions on that one, because I thought the first half was actually an interesting adaptation of the novel that felt a lot more true than the original movie.
Sure, and then they just fucked it up.
They fuck it up. No, they completely fuck it up at the halfway point. Yeah. I completely agree.
And then 3 from Hell.
Oh, so good. What? Are you about to say it's bad? Are you about to say it's bad? What are you about to say?
Oh, I fucking hated it.
Ah! Shut up!
Where Devil's Rejects is in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. I just thought 3 from Hell was a bastardization of the characters. I did not enjoy it.
Well, Brianna, that is not the most popular take. Why did you like 3 from Hell, out of curiosity? Because I haven't seen it yet, so I have no dog in this fight.
It was cool as fuck! And I saw it in a double feature with Devil's Rejects first, and it was just fucking cool. Devil's Rejects, so cool. Hadn't watched it in like so long, and the movie ended, and I was like, rips. This rips. And then 3 from Hell, I don't know. It's not like, they're not.
It's not good.
What? No, fuck off. I don't know. I like those characters. I liked those characters. I obviously wish there was more Sid Haig, but like he was probably just old and like really tired, and he was like, I can't do a whole movie, and then he died, and I was really sad about that, guys. I was like, corpses.
I saw him 2 years ago at a convention.
Oh dang.
Yeah, and he was so old and just
looking rough.
Yeah, he looked rough. It was really kind of heartbreaking. Well, my thing is, don't do the movie if you can't have that character. There was no... Devil's Rejects ended on a perfect note. You didn't have to have the sequel. So then when you try to do the sequel and you can't have Captain Spaulding, don't do the sequel.
Hey, Richard Brake. I love Richard Brake. He was great. He was a good replacement.
Well, okay. To calm down, kids. We're gonna turn the podcast around if you don't stop arguing with each other.
Sure.
Fair enough.
This is debate.
One that you actually really love that I don't think is getting a lot of attention either, Brianna. Under the Silver Lake.
Don't even get me going, boys.
I the spoilers. You might really love that movie, but I was really astonished with it in terms of I only saw it recently, and I'm just like, man, this is weirdly an A24 distributed movie that's the biggest fuck you to the worst A24 fanboy possible, and I completely respect it for doing something that audacious. And it's also just like such a movie that's like not made for a lot of an audience. I'm surprised it ever got made, but the few like Venn diagram people, which involves like Brianna, me, and like about 15 other people, I think would really love it. So it's I get why it's gotten divisive reviews, but it's a phenomenal, unique little movie that I'm surprised exists. And also just a couple others that I really loved Honey Boy, the Shia LaBeouf movie.
Woo!
I thought that one kind of got lost in the shuffle as well. I thought it's done a really good job.
Woo!
Also in terms of just like really efficient, well-made movies to contrast like super long movies we've been talking about. Crawl from the summer. It's a great creature feature of a movie, and it's only like 89 minutes long. And I'm like, it's such an efficient little horror movie that I think deserved a lot more credit. And it also helps that I saw it in a Florida theater in the middle of a rainstorm, and it was like the appropriate like cinematic experience with a bunch of Floridians. It was like
that, the 4D. You saw it in 4D where you get the rain, the shit on you or whatever. It makes you feel like you're there. You had that.
Yeah, it's 4DX basically. Yeah, literally. So I was basically just like people trying to steal the seat, and I move around a bit. But yeah, there's so many great movies definitely to seek out for sure on that. But we want to thank obviously you all for providing that feedback, and also thanks to Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used on our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com, and thanks to Emily Scarter for the art for our show, and thanks of course to Brianna for coming on. Thank you so much. It was lovely having you on. Why don't you plug yourself, your Twitter, and all your writings and such?
Woo! Thank you so much for having me. You can follow me on Twitter at Brianna Ziggs. I write regularly for Screen Queens, Much Ado About Cinema, and Film School Rejects. And I have other stuff elsewhere. I'm sure if you Google my name, you will find it. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to give you a shout out for I loved your piece you did on Over the Garden Wall.
Thank you.
And that's a thing that needs to be seen by more people too. I love that little miniseries. So great. And you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod, and you can also email us feedback at doubleedgeddoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. I also do some, my own thoughts on my Twitter account at NotTheWho'sTommy, and I do writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com, where I do like my reviews and such. I also write satirical superhero news at truesuperherofans.com, and Adam, you have Ghoulish Gourds, right?
I do, and I just want to throw it out there. I'm a little bit behind right now because I had what the doctors call the laryngitis and the flu and a bunch of other things, so I was kind of laid up. No time for arting, but I'm back in the game, baby. By the time you hear this, I've been pumping them out. So again, facebook.com/ghoulishgourds. Hit me up if you want something. I'll hook you up real cheap if you mention that you heard it on this show.
Yes, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on ESO, why not dig into the archives on our regular Podbean feed? And you can rate, review, or just share the show around. That helps us get more visibility out there. But now it's the end of the show, and so we have to do our picking for next week. And we talked about best of this particular year, Adam, but the end of 2019 means also the end of an entire decade. And we're going to do something a bit audacious. We've like revisited topics before, but we've never done a thing where we do a two-parter specifically, one after the other. And so we're doing that because, with the end of a decade, we definitely have to take 2 episodes to talk about it, because that gives us each a chance to talk about a good and a bad movie from this entire decade. And so for this upcoming one, the first part of 2, I have the good picks, you have the bad picks. And you've assigned your 2 movies number between 1 and 10, and I've done the same myself. And usually we would pick number between 1 and 10 for each other's choices, and that gets us our good and bad feature. But when we have a guest like the lovely Brianna over here, we call them up and say, I heard you pick numbers. And then she picks the numbers. So for each of us, for my 2 good picks, number between 1 and 10.
Let's do 4.
All right. At number 3, I have a movie from 2013. I think one that was oddly very prescient of the future that would come in just the 6 years since. It is Spike Jonze's Her.
So funny that I have not watched that movie yet.
Oh, okay.
So that'll be fun. That'll be fun. Yeah. Another first time watch.
Yes. So then at number 7, I had one that I think also got kind of lost in the shuffle, but because it's a foreign horror film from South Korea, Train to Busan, which is my favorite subject movie.
Great fucking movie. God, what a good movie.
Oh yeah,
it's so good.
Yes, great film. But now for Adam's 2 choices, number between 1 and 10, Brianna.
8.
At number 9, I want to say from 2017. I don't know because I didn't pay attention to it because it's garbage. Max Steel.
Oh, wow.
Oh my god. Wow.
Oh my.
A movie everyone's completely forgotten about. I think it's like a Robot Kid or something.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. It's based off an old toy, I think. At number 1, I had The Fanatic.
Oh. From our famed auteur Fred Durst.
Ooh.
Yeah, but no, we're going Max Steel, baby.
But on that note, everybody, it's time to crawl into our horrible, miserable end of our lives and sit down and tell ostensibly nobody about our entire history that might be fake. Let's go and do that.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping through Amazon.com or the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.